Hello and welcome into Chapter 4 for Intro to Electronic Media. Hope you've been enjoying the lectures, or at least have been able to muddle through them as we've discussed. I know it's an information overload, and I'm not going to promise that today is going to be much better, but here we go. We're going to be talking about the structure of the communication industries, basically looking at how they work. The book has some content, primarily dealing with the more emergent technologies, and I really want you to understand some of the traditional media as well, because there are lessons and applications that can come from both. So first off, what we need to do is we need to define what is an industry. Okay, just to let you know what I'm looking at, I've got my iPad right over here. It's where my notes are, so if you see me glancing, that's what I'm looking at. Okay, what is an industry? Basically, an industry consists of a number of organizations that work generally to produce the same good or service. That's as about as broad a definition as I can give you. So let's talk about the media industry. What does the media, our communications industry, produce? It produces technology, which would be a good, and it produces information transfer, communication, if you will. That would be the service it provides. So really the communication industry provides both goods and services. And it's because of this, it has a multitude of facets that make up what we call the communication industry. A couple of things you need to think of in terms of goods and services. What are the goods? Well, that would be the hardware, like I said. It would be the production of your radio, your iPad, your MP3 player, whatever you use to receive information. Okay, when I say information, I don't mean news. What I mean is just content. I'm referring to anything that is produced, whether it's a video, whether it's a song that's been encoded as an MP3, whatever it might be. Software is content that is manufactured, and then the computer that you work with it on would be the hardware, the good that is produced. Okay, now the trick with this is all industries have to produce revenue. Okay, profit is not a bad word. Profit is the reason that companies exist. The idea of a business is to produce a good or service, sell it at a price that can return a profit to the company that does the production, at the same time hitting what the consumer sees as a worthwhile exchange, i.e. price. For example, I may have a fantastic widget that does a myriad of things. A Thneed, okay? A Thneed, if you've watched, what was it, the Lorax, okay? A Thneed is a thing that everyone needs, really, okay? It only has value. It only has in it the value that the consumer is willing to attach to it. So if you've got your Thneed and you have to put, let's say, between paying your laborers, purchase of raw materials or obtaining raw materials, let's say you come to a resultant price of $20 per unit, okay, per Thneed. Well, that's all well and good. And let's say you try to put in a 10% profit. Okay, so you would sell to your distributors, you'd sell the Thneed for $22. Well, now your distributors have to decide what they're willing to sell it for to produce the profit that they need. So they may sell it for $25. Then the consumer goes, and of course that would include, when I say production, I'm not referring just to what it costs to make the Thneed. So I said $22 for profit, but you know what? We need to add $1 for shipping. So now we're up to $23. And let's say the company that's selling it decides they want to make a $3 profit off of it. Because they have to pay for storage, they have to pay for the air conditioning, they have to pay their salaries, Plus, they're in the business to make a profit too. So now our need has gotten up to $26, $27, $28. And at a high pricey exclusive type store, let's say if you get them to pick up, they may mark it up to $50 because they think their clientele is willing to pay $50 for the need. But maybe you got onto selling through Walmart. Well, they're willing to sell it at great low prices, but they put their profit in there, so they may sell it for $25. All well and good. The problem is, do your customers see that need is worth the 2 hours of their own labor that they have to do at their job in order to purchase your product? Now, if they look at that need and they go, you know what, I can pay $10 and get a sweater that'll do the same thing, then you're not going to be able to sell the needs. I don't care what your jingle is. If the consumers don't attach to your product the value that they're willing to pay, in other words, they're willing to pay enough to cover your cost, your profit, the distribution cost, and the profit, and the retailer's cost for a little bit of profit. If they're not willing to pay all that, oh, did I mention taxes? Yeah, we got taxes in there too, all along the way. Well, if the resultant price is more than the value they would ascribe to your product, then it's not going to move. Now, what defines value for a customer? Well, there is the product itself. And if you can attach some sort of intangibles to it, a prestige thing, this whole controversy with Abercrombie and Fitch, apparently somebody made the comment that their clothes are not worn by those kind of people. So one of the some guy who was going to show Abercrombie and Fitch said fine. He went to all the local Goodwill stores and other secondhand and consignment stores, bought as many Abercrombie and Fitch clothes that he can get, and then he gave them to homeless people, so that those kind of people would be wearing Abercrombie and Fitch. Now, why was Abercrombie and Fitch, what were they trying to appeal to? They're trying to make a snob appeal, basically, that only certain kind of people wear their clothing. And why is that important? Well, if you want to identify with the chic people, the good-looking people, the beautiful people, you would buy their clothing. So they're selling in an intangible of prestige and recognition, how people see themselves. I'm sorry, Abercrombie and Fitch does not make that much better a pair of jeans than, say, Wrangler or somebody else. But Abercrombie and Fitch is trying and has heretofore successfully sold the image that goes along with their product. So that's one of those intangibles that go into deciding value. It's kind of like, public television. There are people, now there are a lot, okay, I'm not slamming public television when I say this, but there are people who will identify themselves. I mean, this is true when the people do phone call type reporting, or even the Nielsen diaries. They'll put down how much public television they watch, whether they watch it or not. Why? Because people who watch public television are supposed to be of a certain intellect or whatever. Thus is the composite they want to be known as. And that sometimes skews ratings. And I'm not just throwing that out. It has actually been documented that there's a certain kind of prestige that they want, and they actually have to come up with statistical models to adjust and account for that. So value is more than just, what a consumer thinks in terms of hardcore realities often. There's some people who, I'll go down to Goodwill, and if I need a particular kind of shirt, I'd rather pay $5, $3 at Goodwill than pay $30 down at the store, because the first time you wear it, it becomes used anyway. That's my opinion. But there are other things that people, that maybe I would be willing to pay that extra because I attach a certain value to it. I mean, I'll pay more for this shirt. Why? because this shirt says NGU, and I'm a company man. I like to wear the company logo. So it has a value to me beyond just any other shirt that I might pick up at Goodwill. So, so value is kind of a tricky thing. Anyway, so I just want you to understand that that's the nature, that's one of the tensions that come in when you're ascribing value to a product, and then you're hoping that your consumers will also attach the same kind of value to it. And then when that happens, you make a sale. If the value you attach to it is greater than what the consumer believes it's supposed to be, then you might not have the sale. Or if it's significantly less, then you're losing out on possible profit. And you may actually be decreasing the apparent value or the perceived value by your customers. So it's kind of a tricky. So what does this have to do with an industry? Well, industries are designed to sell a product or a service at a level that will bring enough return to the company to show a profit, yet still not exceed the value that the consumer would be willing to put on it. For example, in broadcasting, an advertiser, when they buy advertising, they're not buying time. Television stations, radio stations do not sell time. They sell eyeballs and ears. I don't mean literally, it's not like this. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. That thing like that scene from Mel Gibson or something like that. No, but what they're selling is the audience. So you have programming. Remember we talked about the four aspects, economics, that's what we're kind of talking about right now. Programming, technology, and regulation. Well, the programming draws in the audience. And then what do they put in there? They put those nasty things called commercials. Yeah, those nasty commercials. Well, when I used to run a TV station, every time I saw a commercial, I'm thinking, cha-ching, cha-ching. I can pay the light bill. I can pay my salary for my employees. I can pay the taxes. I can buy new technology, whatever it might be. So I'm selling my audience to the advertisers who want to put their message in front of my audience. That's the way the advertising works. Well, let's say I let's say I have a 30-minute news show. And in that 30-minute news show, I actually have 10 minutes of actual news content, and the rest of it's advertising. Well, what's going to happen to my audience? They're going to be thinking, this news show is not presenting enough value in terms of real information for me to want to stay and watch it and to sit through the commercials. So all of a sudden now I push the price, if you will, even for my audience participating in my communication, my show. I push the cost in terms of their exposure to commercials beyond the real value to them. Does that make sense? You're listening to the radio and they go into a commercial break and you're going, oh my goodness, how long am I to sit here and listen to and listen and listen? And that's attention. Whether it's talk radio, whether it's a music format, there's a fine balance between, providing the value, whether it's music, talk, information, whatever it might be, to the listener, and the cost of the time spent in commercials. In fact, radio stations will promote themselves at we have 20 minutes free, 20 commercial-free minutes, and then they'll hit the commercial break. So, this idea of value, perceived value versus cost to the producer is a very real part of broadcasting. You will also have trends of how people will consume and buy media. This is talked about in your book, and I'll let them deal more with that. But we talk about the people on the bleeding edge. That's people who invest in technology because it's the latest and greatest thing. That's not me. I was 10 years after CDs came out, before I bought a CD player. But you have people on the bleeding edge. These are the people who bought the $3,000 Betamax decks. I remember paying $300 for a VHS deck. Oh man, yeah, I'm burning edge. And now what do you get a VHS for? If you can find one, $5, $10, $20 at a garage sale. They don't even sell them unless you're buying them in combination with a DVD burner, so you can dub your family films, your family recordings in VHS. You're not going to record any of the produced films. So, it goes through a cycle. You've got the high end cost up front, and then it goes as people buy more is produced, so costs go down, and then it kind of levels out for a while, and then, depending on when the next thing comes by that replaces it, then eventually the technology does not have value anymore. So just be aware of that bleeding edge, if you will. The people who jump on those innovations, and the people who really, if they jump in, then the industry will say, "Oh, we can make money off this product," and then more is produced and prices go down. As production goes up, prices go down because more audience can use it. And in that volume of production, they can lower the cost so that the rest of us plebes can actually enjoy the technology. I'm sorry, did I say that? Anyway, okay, so that's one of the idea of innovation and acceptance of new technologies. Let me see. Let me talk about how the broadcaster makes some money with the advertising. Okay, like I said, the broadcaster is selling eyeballs and ears. They're selling the audience. What do they attract the audience with? They attract the audience with programming. So the programming, let me give you a little history on the way broadcasters have paid for their industry in broadcasting. Radio started off this way. You had KDKA, which you heard about in the history lecture. KDKA in Philadelphia was basically, it was a Westinghouse. It was operated by Westinghouse. And they sold electronic music boxes. The idea was that they would broadcast music, and then people would buy the radios so that they could just plug them in at the house, and then they could have music going on all the time. Sounds nice. It started off, David Sarnoff started off with, he was a ham radio operator, or an early version of radio, and he got to where he would broadcast music at a regular time of day, and people started tuning in. And then eventually he sold the idea, from what I understand, to Westinghouse, who started manufacturing the radios, and then they would broadcast music, and then people would buy the radio so they could pick up the music, and they didn't have to have all the music box discs and such as that. They just turn on the little box and music would appear. Okay, that was one way of paying for advertising. Paying for the radio industry. It was the sale of the radios. The other way was paying for radio was promoted by WEAF. Now, WEAF was owned by AT&T. The way it worked was it pulled off of the idea of a common carrier. Now, what is a common carrier? In the early days of industry, there was cutthroat competition. And one of the ways to ensure that your competitor was going to hurt while you prospered was to block his access to markets. And to give you an example, let's say I own a steel company. Well, I might do a deal with one of the major railroad lines that go out west or go to a particular market. And I might say, tell you what, if you will carry my product only, I will pay you 10%, 15% more per ton than is the standard rate. Well, they may not carry other companies, but if my company is paying them more, then they would only carry my product, and my product would be the one that makes it to that market, and my competitors can't. So I get a monopoly in that new market, or in that that particular market. Let's say I'm shipping steel, and people are using it in Minneapolis in order to build housing, or to build frames for housing or for building. Well, if I can get the monopoly in Minneapolis, man, I got it made. And that's how people were building and developing their industries, or whether it's steel, maybe it's a food good, whatever it might be, whatever product I'm trying to distribute. Now, that was looked at by the regulators as this is not a good thing. And they came up with what is called a common carrier designation. Common carrier designation basically says that anybody who can pay the fee gets carried. Simple enough. So your telephone. The telephone companies are considered common carriers. They cannot refuse to sell you a product, for whatever reason, if they don't like your political affiliation, the color of your hair, your race, your gender, whatever it might be. If you got the money, they have to sell you the service. Now, there are laws, say, regarding the telephone. If you abuse the service, then the government can go after you. But the telephone company, if you have the money, they have to sell you a telephone line or lease you use of the line. That's it. The postal service, they cannot refuse to carry your mail unless it's something that's by law hazardous or something like that, or something that's illegal. So that's common carrier. Now, WEAF kind of tried to work on that. Remember, they were owned by AT&T, and who owned the telephone lines. And what they would do is they would sell a block of time for an hour. And whoever wanted to use that hour to promote their product could get on and hawk their wares, talk about how wonderful their snake oil is, whatever it might be. And this worked for a while. But guess what? People weren't really interested in sitting and watching hour-long promotions of a product. So things started shifting from the hour quickly, from what I understand. Moved from trying to spend an hour selling a product to because nobody was watching. And remember, what a television or a radio station sells is eyeballs and ears. So they hit on the idea, well, if we have a program that people want to see, and then we would be the sponsors. In fact, the early job of advertising agencies was to find program ideas and match them with sponsors. And so they would connect the two, and then by that you get the Palmolive Hour, you get Star Texaco Theater, and things of this sort, where the primary advertiser or the sponsor would have a spot periodically throughout the show, and you would sit through the spots because you knew the programming was going to come a little bit later. Now, it started off with you would have one sponsor per show, and that moved into segmented sponsorships till finally we have what we have now, which is primarily spot advertising, where the network or the producer will sell the show to or distribute the show to the radio or television stations. And then they have what they call avails, which are the segments of advertising where the local station can insert their programming. Or in the case of a network, the network buys the program from the producer, and then they put their advertising in, and then they make certain spots available for the local the local TV station or radio station to put their ads in. I know whenever we're doing football games, when I work with basketball with ESPN3, I was sitting back there. My job was to roll the commercials for the local advertisers. And there were certain breaks that were designated for the ESPN3 network, which is an online network, and then I'd push the button to roll the commercials for the locally sold ads. So we kind of split up where the possible revenue could come out of the show. So that's what we call spot advertising. Now, you still have sponsorships that go on now. You'll say this. The Super Bowl this quarter brought to you by, and they still have other ads in there, but every spot you might see a particular advertiser mentioned. Also, in public television or non-commercial, we can't sell spots like at WNGR, but we can have sponsors. We do not sell advertising for WNGR. Don't ever call it an ad, because it's not. It is a sponsorship announcement. For non-commercial, you can make sponsorship announcements that can talk about the sponsor, their good or service that they offer. You can give their location. You can give information about how to contact them, where their website is, where their phone number is. But the two things you can't do are, you cannot talk pricing. You know, you can't say, so-and-so has the $5 lunch special today. No. And you cannot call for action. Well, what is call for action? Call for action would be something like, you need to call, 864-555-1212. Well, because you're giving instruction. You're telling your audience they need to do something. You are calling for action. You can't do that. You have to kind of work around. If you want more information, their number is 555-1212. We encounter that with one of our main sponsors for football and basketball. We had to write their sponsorship announcement in such a way that it took out all the verbiage that defined it as advertising, and then reword so that it was strictly a sponsorship announcement. So in non-commercial television, we do have program sponsors. This hour, if you listen to public radio or public television, this hour brought to you, or this show brought to you, and they'll list the people that are the organizations that sponsor the broadcasting. Now, let me see, trying to get, okay, sorry, I'm looking through my notes trying to get up here. Now, what are the different types of advertising that you can be looking at? Well, first of all, you do have local advertising. This is the ad. These are the ads sold by the local radio or television station. This is where they make their money. And if they're an independent station, in other words, they don't have an affiliation, they are a network affiliation, then they get all the revenue from the ads that they can generate audience for. And see, that's key. An independent station, right, does get all the revenue from all the avails. But without a good programming source, such as a network, they're going to have a hard time attracting the audiences that will generate ad sales. So, having a network, working with a network, does have its advantages. You have regional advertising. What's regional advertising? Well, regional advertising is when a national company doesn't want to go network advertising, which hits all the stations and all the markets that are network affiliates. Rather, they want to key on specific markets. When I say market, I'm referring to a geographical area that has a certain number of stations in there that are kind of defined in a market area. For example, we're in the Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg market. So I think we're like 33rd in the nation, which is not bad. These three areas, the stations overlap. So that's a market. I grew up in New Orleans. That's a market. Chicago is a market. So that's what I mean by a market. Okay, so let's say I sell snowmobiles. Well, snowmobiles are not going to go over big in New Orleans. I'm sorry. We just don't get that much snow. But where would they go over big? Well, they would go over big in Minnesota, Wisconsin. They would go big in, the northern states, South Dakota, North Dakota. Yes, there is a North Dakota. The Montana, those areas up there, as well as into Michigan and out into the New England states, etc. So I want to hit those markets. I don't want to hit the southern markets. What am I going to do? I'm going to get on the phone as an advertiser. I'm going to call Minneapolis. I'm going to call Chicago. I'm going to call Sioux City. No, I'm not. That's too much work. So we have what we call national reps. They're generally out of New York. They're called national sales reps. And what they do is they have contacts in all the markets. And then let's say the advertiser for, let's say for motorboats, let's say, I'm trying to think, Evinrude calls up and says, I want to hit these markets, and they rattle off about 10 markets. Well, then the, the national rep will contact their stations in those markets and say, I've got a potential buy on for your 6 o'clock news and primetime spots on Monday and Tuesday on these shows. What do you have available? And then the national salesperson in the TV station would take that, or the radio station would say, okay, I've got this avail, this avail, this avail. It's available spots, areas. And then they'll send the contract back and said, I can fulfill this. And then the national sales rep goes, okay, and goes back to the advertiser. We got to buy, go for it, and then the contract comes through. You know how I know this process? Because I was the national sales assistant at WDSU TV. My job was to receive the teletype. Yes, we used teletype back then. It was old technology. And then it would be printed out. I would give it to the national sales rep. He would go through, check avails, and pull all the information together. Then he would give it back to me to type up. And this was in the days of expensive long distance. So I quite literally would sit down at the teletype machine. Yes, okay, I'm really going old school. Type out the contract, and then we'd put it on a ribbon. And then I'd load the ribbon in. We'd make the phone call, and then we'd lock into their machine. And then instead of taking the 10, 15 minutes it would take for me to type out this thing, it would just take what I typed up and then spit it out in about 15 seconds, transfer all the data, and then that would be the end of the phone call. Pretty snazzy. So, yeah, it was interesting being an 18-year-old working as a national sales assistant in a major market, talking to people in New York. Our rep was Blair. It was an interesting my birthday when they found out I was just 18. Yeah, anyway, it was fun. Okay, that's the way national sales work. You've got a national sales rep that has key markets where they know where they have stations that they work with, that they represent, and then they work to place their advertisers in those markets. And what happens with an ad agency? And ad agencies basically do the same thing, and they will work with a media mix. It won't be just for television. It'll be television, radio, magazines, newspaper, whatever. And then they'll sell more of a media mix rather than a national sales rep who works with specific media outlets. Okay. Now, so that's national sales. Another type of advertising is network advertising. The networks buy programs from a producer such as Buckheimer, Bad Robot, whatever it might be, and they'll buy the show, and then they will sell a certain number of spots in the network programming to their advertisers, their people who want to buy network advertising. Then they'll send that, and they'll distribute that to the local affiliate, who will then plug in their spots in those open places. Like when I used to work with, when I was general manager at WCQT, sorry, I had trying to remember between all the TV stations and radio stations, WCQT in Alabama. We're a FamilyNet affiliate, and they would send a movie out every Friday night. Well, actually, they sent it out Monday nights. We played it on Friday nights. But we had an availability. They took basically the odd breaks, the top of the hour, third break, the fifth break, etc. And we got the even breaks. So I would sell my spots into those even breaks. And when we'd cut the movie together, I would leave their breaks intact, and then I would drop my ads into the movies in my breaks. So that's how we shared revenue coming off that. So that would be network advertising. And then another programming source you have is something called syndication. Now, syndication is where it's non-network programming that a local station can buy. You might have something called first run. I'm sorry, I'm talking about programming. Network, okay. excuse me, forget what I just was talking about. I jumped. Let's go back to advertising. Okay, we got the network advertising, how that works. Another type of advertising is something called co-op advertising. Co-op advertising works like this. And I'll give you an example. When I was at WCQT, we worked with a local boot shoe sales store, and they worked. And one of one of the brands they sold was Wolverine boots. So we did a co-op with them. Basically, co-op works like this. The local distributor or local retailer and the national advertisers will buy advertising together and split the cost. So let's say they did a $500 contract with me. Well, the local advertiser would pay $250, and the national advertiser would do a $250, and that would cover my invoice coming in. There is a fraud that sometimes occurs, and that is sometimes an unscrupulous local radio or television station may say, tell you what, the cost for this spot or this package, let's say, is $1,000. And instead of you're having to pay $500 and the local national guy pay $500, they don't know. I'll bill you for $2,000. And that way you'll send that bill to the national advertiser, and they'll pay the $1,000, all of it, and we just won't tell them that you didn't pay anything. That's called fraud. Okay, it's illegal. It's immoral because it's lying, but it's a double billing, and it's against the law. So you don't want to do that. But co-op advertising is a good way for local advertisers to connect with their national producers and to help each other's credibility. If you watch a lot of the car sales ads, Ford, you see these pictures, these shots of beautiful cars driving along the California seacoast and magnificent flyover shots, and the local guy didn't produce them, but the ads look good. And then they get to the end of the ad and say, go to your Ford dealer, so-and-so Ford on the Motor Mile down in Lawrence. Well, that's the local tag. You see, they'll have the ad that's produced by the national advertiser looks slick, looks real good, and then the local guys will add whatever they have at the end. For example, going back to the Wolverine ad that I was talking about, we had their nationally produced spot, good music and all that, and there was a point in about the last 7 seconds where the announcer from Wolverine was quiet, and you just had the music bed, and then we had our own local guy, in fact I think it was me, voice, for your Wolverine boots, go to so-and-so shoe sales down at 4th and Main in Coleman. And we had a picture of their store and the Wolverine logo down at the bottom. And that was the local tag. That's called co-op advertising. One thing about co-op advertising you need to be aware of is you need to be aware of something called a POP, or a proof of performance. It's not just for co-op advertising, but this is where I first encountered it. Proof of performance is basically a list off your log of every time that ad run. And then you sign it and it gets notarized. It's a legal document, and that sends verification to the co-op advertiser that indeed the ads did run. Who else might use POPs? We have the ROTC out of Furman that works with with North Greenville as well. We will advertise for ROTC. Not advertise, did I say that? I mean, they sponsor our programming. So we will make announcements about their sponsorship. Well, we have to document that those sponsorship announcements did run. And I have to go back to the log, and I pull them all up, and I document it, and then I send that off to their advertising agency, and they verify and cut us a check. So don't neglect the POPs, the proofs of performance. That's where you make money. In fact, one time I remember we had our computer basically lost our logs. I couldn't verify that things ran. and we did not get, and not that they refused to pay. I didn't have it. I couldn't generate anything. I didn't even submit. I said, look, it's not your fault, but I can't provide you with what you need. Therefore, we're going to have to swallow this. And we had to swallow a loss of revenue. So make sure you have accurate reporting and accurate recording. And for us at WNGR, and if we ever can get some sponsors on the vision, when I say we need to write it down in the log, like say you're doing sports announcing and you're now doing a sponsorship announcement, when I say log it, I mean log it, because without that logging, I do not have paper proof that we fulfilled the contract. And without paper proof, it didn't happen. Oh, I think I did that back then. I know I did. No, where's it documented? If it's not on paper, it didn't happen. Okay, I had one other form of advertising that people sometimes use is something called barter. Now, barter is a trade out. We use this for our newscast. We had a local furniture store that provided and changed out our furniture on a seasonal basis and provided decorating for our sets for our morning show. And in exchange for that, we provided them with advertising. We were a commercial station. And this is totally legit. Sometimes you will have companies that will provide wardrobe, if you will, for your announcers. So-and-so's wardrobe is provided by such-and-so men's store or such-and-so boutique or whatever it might be. And the clothing is provided and advertising is provided as compensation for whatever goods or services are provided. For the when we produced sports, football and basketball, Chick-fil-A, they had sacks ready to go, and we just do our order and we carry it out to the game, provide food for our crew, and we provided banner ads, and just our guys would say, hey, by the way, thanks to Chick-fil-A providing crew meals tonight. It's delicious, man. I'm enjoying my chicken salad sandwich, whatever it might be. So that would be barter. That is another way things are paid for. Now, we've been talking about broadcasting with advertising. The way you know if you've got people watching when you do advertising is by ratings. Now, in a later lecture, I'm going to go into a much more detailed description and discussion of ratings. But for the time being, basically ratings are maintained by, are developed, should I say, by taking a sample of the audience and finding out what they're watching when, and then using that sampling to kind of extrapolate out to what the whole marketplace is doing. It's basically, ratings is basically taking a sample, like any statistical analysis, and then applying the results of the sample to the whole. And that's how they do numbers. They'll call up, they may call 1,000 people in a market and say, what are you watching right now, let's say during the Super Bowl? What are you watching right now? Oh, we're watching the Super Bowl. Okay, thank you very much. And they'll call somebody else and say, what are you watching right now? Oh, I'm not watching anything. I'm tired of TV tonight. I always stay off the TV. Okay, and then they'll go through and they'll call 1,000 people, let's say. And then they'll mark down who's watching the Super Bowl, who's watching something else, who's not watching anything at all. And then they use that to develop a number of how many people watch the Super Bowl. They'll do samples in New York and Chicago and major markets, and then they'll use that to extrapolate to the overall behavior of the country with more than 1,000 calls. But they'll do the sampling that way to determine what is the overall behavior of the market, which is the United States. That is how they do broadcasting. Now, internet advertising is interesting. You see, we don't have to take ratings. Why? Because of metadata. Metadata is that data that occurs whenever, let's say you're watching something and there's an ad that comes up, and then you stay there through the ad, or at least the ad is playing. Well, they know what ad is playing, and they know that you're watching it because they're, as you're taking data in, i.e. to watch the show, metadata is being put out by your computer that says so-and-so an individual is watching this show. And they get real good hard numbers. When an ad shows up, they can check click-throughs and things like that. So all this metadata is part of how people who use the internet or advertise on the internet can see how people are responding with their product. YouTube. You ever use YouTube? I have produced a number of videos there. I have them on. And I can go through and see how people are using my content. I've got, of all things, it's a flag waving. I think I mentioned it before. A flag waving in the wind in slow-mo. It's starting to get more and more hits. I'm over 3,000, and it's picked up more momentum in the past 2 months than I had in the first 10. So it's interesting to see how it's developed. Well, I can look at that. I can look at where in the world people are watching my little video of American flag. And I also have a place where they can talk to me. I ask them, how are you using this? And I've got churches that are using it for their patriotic tributes and things like that. One school was using it for a tribute to military at their school. So, it's neat the way the internet, I think the metadata capacity of the internet is going to give us a lot of even more accurate information than the ratings could do. But again, that's a subject for another discussion. Okay, what does, we talked about networks. Now, why would if you're going to have to share revenue, what does a network provide to a local station? Well, there are a few things. Number one, it provides a programming source. I remember when the satellite was having issues, the satellite that we downlinked from FamilyNet. We were a FamilyNet affiliate. Oh, by the way, two terms. Uplink sends a signal up or something up to the transponder on the satellite. A downlink receives the signal from the satellite. So our downlink was fine. Problem is there were problems with the satellite. Either it shifted out of position or the transponder went bad, so they had to shift to another satellite. So I was without programming for a few days, and I had to bring somebody out, and literally we had to physically move the satellite dish. It wasn't one of these that was articulated. This was a big old 3-meter dish that had to be actually positioned. That was fun. But in the meantime, I had to feed the programming monster. I had to have something on the air. So we had a backlog of movies. We had a bunch of other stuff that I was able to put on. But I was really happy when we got the network back on because the network provided me with a variety of programming. It also provides you with a quality of programming. Now, I think we did pretty good. We actually had a automobile show that was better than what was being produced out in Birmingham. I know because I watched what the competitors were doing. And we had a home show that instead of just being photographs, we actually walked through and took pictures and looked around the house, went into the closets, whatever, So it had a higher production value. So we were competitive in our local market and with some of the area ones in the region. But it was nice to have national names, national resources to pull in. So, even a small, let's say, not a FamilyNet affiliate, but let's say even in a medium-sized market, you can pull in the CBS News. You can have that as part of your lineup if you're a CBS affiliate. And you can have the quality programs that are generally produced, at least production quality-wise, by the networks. Second, it's a promotional source. Number one, you get to use the name of your network. We are NBC on Channel 4, WYFF Channel 4, NBC 4, or whatever it might be. Or, you attach yourself to a network with a nationally known name. And plus, they provide you with promotional material. They may get their local talent, or their national talent, to say something effective, and we're going to whatever you want to say. I used to work for an NBC affiliate, so they might have the local announcer, the national anchors to say, And you want to make sure you stay tuned for your local news on KWTX TV. And hey, Waco, we're coming back to you, something like that. And we would actually get these national figures to do local promos for us to promote our station in our programming. So you have that, plus again the quality and the name recognition. Finally, and that leads into the third one, and that it boosts your credibility. You're not just a little independent doing something right there. No, you're nationally connected. You have the national news. You have the national programming. And that national news really can be important. I remember on 9/11, we were a FamilyNet affiliate. Well, FamilyNet did not have a news department. Therefore, I couldn't cover anything of the planes that were crashed in New York and into the World Trade Center. I mean, it was, I could say, hey, this just happened, and there's going to be a prayer vigil at such and so church, and this is what's going on. Airlines are being grounded. I could provide that information, but I couldn't show the pictures of a national emergency because I did not have a national news outlet. So, there are some advantages to network affiliation. Let's see. Now, your book talks about how in an industry you need to know the functions of an industry, and it talks primarily about production and distribution. Now, I briefly addressed that. Production and our industry has hardware, as I said before, the technologies, and then you have content, and they have their own means and their own routing, if you will, of production. If you look at the hardware side, it's pretty straightforward. You have a manufacturer who develops the technology. You have a distributor who will sell the technology. Sometimes they're one and the same. I can buy directly from Sony or through their reps, things like that. Content, it's a little bit more convoluted. You have, let's say you have a network affiliate. You have a production company that actually produces the film, the programming that goes through the network, which then goes through the distribution to the local television station. But if it went through syndication, it would go through the off-network syndication. Excuse me. That means it went on the network first. Let me talk a little bit with you about the programming, and then what are the different types of programming. This is where I was going earlier, and then I rudely interrupted myself. Different types of programming, and then we'll get back to this. Different types of programming. You've got locally produced. This would be your local news, local sports. You might have, like we had a local homes tour where we worked with the realtor to show homes that were for sale. We had a brief time, we had a show for local used car dealers. They'd bring by their cars and we'd shoot those. And what else? Oh, we produced a local health concern show with a local hospital. Okay, pardon me. Those would be some of the local production that we would do. And depending on your market, you might have other different types of local production. And this would be for both radio and television. One quick note, you don't have as many radio stations that are network affiliates. And we'll talk more about when we get to the part about how you have to be flexible. We'll talk about why. But television stations, you will have local production. You will also have network programming. That comes from the network, if you're a network affiliate. Sometimes stations can, let's say if there's not a primary affiliate in a market, they might pull some programming from a station that doesn't have a network that doesn't have a primary affiliate. Example, in Waco, we had 2 TV stations. Well, we were the NBC affiliate at KWTX, but I think it was KCEN was the other station that was over our market. And they pulled their programming from both CBS and ABC. be partially one from the other. And now if we wanted something off of CBS or NBC, as long as KCEN didn't carry it, we could grant it clearance. What is clearance? That's another important term you need to know. Clearance basically is when a local television station grants permission for the network programming to pass through its broadcast, that they will carry it. It's an important important term for you to know. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Another important one is something called network compensation. Network compensation is this: when a local station allows clearance for a programming, they're giving up their broadcast time to the station. To the network. Now, in a smaller market, you don't. The networks don't generally pay. Now, the local affiliates don't pay to carry the programming. You understand that? The networks receive their revenue from the network advertising. But in some of the bigger markets, the networks may want so much to be on a particular station, to be in that market, that they're willing to pay to compensate the local station for their airtime. So it's not like a whole lot of money, but it is one of those things in the business relationship between the network affiliate and the network. Again, network compensation is money paid by the network to the local station for the use of their airtime. Okay, so I just want to make sure you got those two terms. So you have network programming. Then you also have something called syndication. Now, syndication is programming that is purchased by the local TV station. This is where I was going before. For them to carry. We're talking about game shows. We're talking about maybe the local hunting show or something like that. It's a program that is produced and then sold directly to the station. Now you have first run syndication. Again, this would be something like your game shows, a lot of the local hunting shows, things like that, things that are produced and they go directly to the TV station. Then you have something called off-network syndication. Now, off-network syndication is a program that was on the network, and then and it built up an audience. And then after a certain period of time, the people who produce the show can then put their programming into syndication where they can make more money. You see, the programming producers don't make a lot of money in that first year or two or three with a network show. They may break even, hopefully. Hopefully they won't take a loss. But they don't make as much money for those first few seasons. Then they can start pushing the network. Okay, we need more money for this if we're going to be producing more shows, and you got the audience, and then the revenues may start moving up. But at the beginning, they may even take a loss in order just to get the show on networks. Why? Because after it's run on the networks, it can go into syndication. And in syndication, that's where the producers can make their money back for what they produce for the network. Well, why would they go to the network? Because on the network, you get the national exposure. You get the audience that is built up. I think about MASH. It's a show that was popular back in the 70s. I remember seeing MASH, 5 times some days? It was still on the networks, the most current episodes, but the station that I think KWTX, the one that I worked for, had it running at least one other time during the day, if not twice, and then KCEN had it twice, and then we had it. I think, I don't remember if it was on our network or on another one, because I didn't work at the station when I paid attention to this. But I remember counting one day, and either KCEN or KWTX1 also had the network relationship, so they had it in prime time. So you could literally watch MASH 5 times in the day on the days when it was airing in prime time as a network show. So that's what off-network syndication is. The show develops an audience while it's on the network, and then it carries that audience, they hope, into syndication and where they can make more money off of it. Okay, so that would be off-network syndication. Now, Where is this going? It's going crazy. What has happened? Well, with the new media, and your book really starts moving into this, you have what I've heard referred to as the democratization of the media. You see, in traditional media, they decide when you're going to watch what you're going to watch. Now, if you have a VCR, or excuse me, if you have a TiVo or something like that, or PVR, whatever you want to call them, you can record DVR. You can record the show, but then you watch it later. Okay, that gives you a little bit more flexibility. But nowadays, with as the democratization is fully put in place, I at any time can go to Netflix and watch a show that they happen to carry that I want when I want it, when I want to watch it, and I can watch it without commercials. You have other video programming sources that can provide video, and they'll put a commercial. They'll have one advertiser that'll sponsor a particular episode of a show, whatever it might be. Brought to you with limited commercial interruptions by AT&T or by Sprint or whatever it might be. So now I get to choose when I want to watch a program, as opposed to having to wait for them to. But not for them to air it. But not only that, I can not just be a consumer, I can be a producer. You got Rhett and Link producing their own videos. They have their own empire going with that. Blimey Cow, on YouTube producing. So you've got a variety of ways to distribute content, and it's moved from people who have the several $1 million facilities to someone who has a computer like this one, shooting and producing content and uploading it to YouTube. So this is what they call democratization. It has been moving back to the people. Now, what does this mean for the industries? Well, you're having you're squashing, if you will, the distribution pyramid. Instead of having so many layers, the book refers to this as disintermediation. In other words, you don't have as many steps for the programming to get from the producer to the consumer, or should I say from the producer to the consumer, because one is not necessarily above the other. In fact, it's the consumers that drive the ability of the producers. So that's one of the effects with the new media. People are producing things directly to the internet. ESPN3 is an example. Instead of having to go to broadcasters, ESPN3 is strictly online, and you pay a fee, or if it's a free game, because of advertising support, you go tune into the game on your computer. We do the same thing with our sports at NGU. We have live streaming of like the football games and the basketball games. Actually, that was developed in a large part by students working with our sports information director, Micah Sepko. So, that we're producing live football, we're producing live basketball, we're producing a variety of sports through the internet. So it's been incredible, the change that has happened in the past 5, 6, 10 years. A couple of things that you need to be aware of. Nature, okay, I mentioned in the notes, nature of vertical integration and horizontal growth. Just a concept to understand. Vertical integration is this. This is when you have a company, let's say that's a producer, that also then buys a distribution means. And so you have, they take care of the various stages in the process. Think about the production process. You need a production company. You have a network for distribution. Then you have, you might have a hard copy distributor, make it convert it to DVDs, as well as your local broadcast stations. Well, let's say you have a producer like Sony that owns a television network that also handles their distribution and, the building of DVDs, etc. And since the network may own a group of television stations, they're handling the distribution. So you've got all these 4 levels in vertical integration. One the thing I need to add to the discussion of that is something called an O&O. An O&O is an owned and operated station, owned by and operated by a network. So NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox actually own television stations. And this allows them to have all the revenue out of those local stations, but also gives them accountability to the FCC through those local stations. When they had the great Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction during the Super Bowl, the FCC did not fine all the affiliates. They only, because they can't fine the network. The network's not a broadcaster. They don't have jurisdiction over just a program producer. But they do have FCC does have jurisdiction over the local affiliates that are, the local O&Os, owned and operated. So they find those stations as a way to put the financial bite as accountability on the networks. So you need to be aware of O&Os. O&Os are stations that are owned by and operated by the networks. Affiliates are stations that have a contractual arrangement with the network to carry network programming. And then independents are stations that do not have an affiliation or connection with the network, and they provide their own programming either through local production or syndication. Okay, sorry, that was another aside. The future is going to be marked by change, and the companies are going to have to be flexible and able to adjust to the changing marketplace. There's something called convergence going on. Now, what is convergence? Basically, it's how different media types are going through the same digital channel. I go to my computer. I can pull up text off the internet. I can listen to radio stations. I can listen to music. I can download MP3s. I can watch television. I can watch movies. All of this has just been translated into bits and bytes, and then it all comes together in a digital distribution. That is convergence. Some stations and some organizations are responding well, others are not. You have Gannett is producing, the book mentions, producing a news outlet that allows them to produce, if it needs video, if it needs pictures, if it needs print, whatever it needs, they're going to get that information out through their website. Just what is at hand, rather than saying, oh no, we don't have pretty pictures, therefore we can't carry the story, like a TV station might do. If we don't have good pictures, what good is it on TV? So that's one of the things that's going on with convergence. Another element of the convergence actually is more of a convergence of producer and consumer. You now have surveys being taken directly through the internet. What do you think of this? Type questions, and people can vote. I remember there was a Monk episode. They were going to show one in color and one in black and white, and viewers were asked to vote about which one do you like better. Well, I don't think the producers were necessarily wanting to know, or going to base all of their production decisions based on that one little questionnaire. But what they did was they got the viewers involved and made them feel part of. And that's one of the things that's really growing in media consumption, is the consumers are not just consumers. They're becoming participants in the communication process. So that's one, and with convergence, we now have that possibility, because convergence doesn't just bring all the different media types into one digital channel. It also allows for feedback back to the producer. Case in point, I have some videos that I produced of my dulcimer playing. Well, me being the teacher and being somewhat talkative, I described what I was doing with the dulcimer and talked about it, and before I started playing, and then I played. And then I went back later and went to the analytics, where they look at how people tune in and tune out of the video. And it starts off slowly growing, and then when I hit the music, people really start staying interested. So that tells me that I need to cut off that yakking at the beginning, put that in the description, and then just go right to the music because that's what people want to see. So, that's the kind of thing that convergence is allowing. The book talks about AT&T and how all the interplay of technology, growth, flexibility work together in building a company. You need to understand that in the new media, it's going to be a requirement of flexibility. Let me tell you the tale of two companies, Apple and Kodak. Apple, with Steve Jobs at the helm, saw itself not as a computer company, but as as a company that provides platforms for information. So you have your iPhone, you have your iPad, you have your Mac, you have your iMac, you have a variety of ways, your iPod, you have a variety of ways to get information across. And they weren't married to a particular technology. They were married to a mission of providing routes for information. Kodak was different. Kodak was a film producer and a film development company. They even developed a digital camera back, I think it was in the 70s. But they were a film company. So they did put all of their money, and they didn't jump into the digital imaging until it was too late, and eventually Kodak shut down because they saw their identity in their product, not in what they provide to their customer. They saw themselves living by the steak, not by the sizzle, to use an old cliche. So companies that are going to develop need to look at how they interface with their, or what should I say, the value gained, the uses that are gratified. We're talking about use gratification by the user of the technology. So, what do you need to do? There are a couple of things that in that flexibility, you need to look at how your company sees its audience, how it sees its technology in reaching that audience, and try to see where the trends are and moving ahead to pick up that audience. I'm going to close with this little description of the history from an industry standpoint of traditional media. When radio first came on the scene, it was there for the big audience. It was there to attract people to the electronic hearth. No pictures, but people literally would sit around in the evening listening to the radio, watching the radio, as it were. And that was where people gathered, and they would listen to the news and they'd listen to the programming. Well, then along came television, and now it was radio with pictures, and radio, traditional radio, suffered badly and was in marked decline until radio discovered something called niche marketing, the advent of rock and roll and other types of music, that they were able to find a particular target audience. So television took over the general audience to address. Radio looked for niche audiences. Rock and roll, the teen group. So we'll advertise Brill cream and stuff for zits and the cars and soda pop and all that stuff. And then country music would advertise things that maybe were more relative to their audience. And now we have a variety of formats, everything from classical to gospel, R&B, rock and roll, various types of rock. You've got album-oriented rock, you've got top 40, etc. Each of them are targeted to specific audiences. Why is that important? Well, they discovered that it wasn't a matter of just reaching a big number of people. Rather, it was a matter of reaching potential buyers. So that's why you would have, on, let's say, television advertising, that's why they advertise sugary cereals and McDonald's and toys on Saturday mornings during the Saturday morning cartoons, if they still have those. I don't know if they do. I'm not usually watching television on Saturday morning. But the idea was to, let's say, for WNGR, when we're looking for sponsors, we look for sponsors who might be interested, that have goods and services that our students, our listeners, might be interested in. So ROTC is a big one, and I've talked with other, restaurants and other people who might be wanting to reach our student audience. That way, they're not spending a whole lot of money just for a big audience. they're spending money to reach a very specific audience that's more likely to buy their product. That's what's happening with the internet as well. You go to a website, let's say you're interested in golf, you go to a website for golfing, and what do they have there? They have ads for golf clubs and golf bags, etc. Television is moving this way too. Now you have some general audience type appeals, but more and more in television you're looking for niche. CBS, ABC, NBC, the big three were all big general audience type networks. So what did Fox do? Fox came along and tried to do the alternatives. They took some risks, The Simpsons, and other programming that was a little bit more edgy and less broad audience appeal, more specific audience appeal. This leads into something that I had mentioned before, the well curve. Instead of having the big middle where everybody's going to watch that, you have something called the well curve. See if I can do this. Where I'm going to have to do just in front like that. Okay, you got this middle where you don't have as many people, but you have these extremes are different polarities. Science fiction group, sports nuts. Well, you have a sci-fi channel and ESPN. So we're starting to see a lot more targeted or segmented appeal rather than broad audience appeal. And this is being reflected it's going to the point where with the internet, they're looking at local distribution where they can actually target specific neighborhoods and the things that are in the particular neighborhoods. What happens when you go onto Facebook? Facebook looks at your interest, and then you have the banner ads over to the side, very specific to you. They're talking about a means of they're experimenting with facial recognition technology. So when you walk into a store, if you're participating, they'll recognize your face through the technology and then send to your cell phone computers and coupons and ads from that store that fit with your interest and your previous buying patterns. Talk about specialization. So with the technology, maybe person of interest doesn't sound that far-fetched anymore, with that much knowledge about me, but that's a whole nother subject. So technology, it's critical, and it's critical to the development of the industry, but it's not alone what drives the industry. Remember value. Remember the role of the consumer. What will they buy? What value will they attach to it? What they're willing to pay. And then how you can best serve and meet that audience where they are. I think that's enough for right now. Enjoy your reading. This is a lot more beyond, but this is what I'm telling you now is to complement what you're reading in the book. So wish you the best, and Chapter 5 will be the next one we'll discuss, and then the test comes up. Talk to you then.